one of the largest and longest running empires in history, spanning 623 years, from 1299 to 1922.
The Ottoman Empire.
And through continents, including the Balkans in southeastern Europe, Arabia and Central Asia, and coastal northern Africa. Like many great empires that came before it, the Ottoman Empire was based on slavery. But unlike most examples of slavery, in the Ottoman Empire, slaves were white.
So you hear that? In the Ottoman Empire, the slaves were white. And also this was in the late 1200 century to the early 13th or 1300 century. I think it was 1299 is when the uprising started. Let's say 1300s then, let's put it 1300. The Ottoman Empire, I didn't even know they had, until I come across this video, I didn't even know they had the Ottoman Empire, and they had white slaves. I know they were slaves because every continent used to enslave their own, who they have. The powerful always enslave the weak. But a white slave self, this is my first time. That's why I like this video. You can just go into this video and again learn about it and then see if it's factual or not about the Ottoman Empire. But I know of the Ottoman Empire though. It's a fact. I've heard of it. But anyway, let's continue.
The Ottoman slave trade spanned the entirety of the empire's existence, even after attempted abolishments in the late 19th century. Particularly during the earlier centuries of the empire, slaves were taken during war raids or politically organized expeditions ordered by the Sultan across southern and eastern Europe, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, with a large percentage shipped to the capital Constantinople, nowadays known as Istanbul. And later, from the 16th to 19th centuries, a huge number of Europeans, hundreds of thousands, were captured by Barbary pirates and sold as slaves to the Ottoman Empire, although the Ottomans themselves did not participate in these raids.
As always, they never just participate, but they have them anyway.
1 in 5 residents of
stick up in. Southern Europe and Asia, part of Asia and part of Africa was under the Ottoman Empire rule, according to this. So it was Europe, Asia. So that's the Ottoman Empire spanned 3 continents. That's a lot of continents to cover. And there was a sultan. The sultan's, I forget his name. Something under the Magnificent. Let's get into it.
Constantinople were slaves, which was not dissimilar to the Roman Empire.
Constantinople, aka Istanbul.
This is the largest example of white slavery in history, although comparatively lesser study has been done on this than the African-American slave trade.
Yeah, because it's not, I've never really heard of it before until now.
Like Richard the Lionheart, who journeyed across Europe to forcefully convert people to Christianity and take over their land, the Ottoman Empire did much the same, but was Muslim-led and instead captured Eastern European.
But you see, it was Muslim-led as well. Don't forget, when the slave trade started in Africa, it was the Arabs who came and bought slaves from the king of that area of Africa then. And also, the Ottoman Empire was Turkish. It's in Turkey. It was started in Turkey, which is now known as the Turkish Empire. I read somewhere. But they all do the same thing. They always say, oh, they didn't take part in the enslavement, but they bought slave. This is what every slave owner argument was up to this day.
And young Christian boys to convert them and enlist them in a special branch of the Ottoman army known as the Janissaries. More on them later. And although religion and payback played their own part in the Ottoman raids, financial reasons provided a far greater motive for enslaving those from conquered countries.
All slave
at least we can conclude
started because of financial gain. That's the basis of
most sources available on slavery in the Ottoman Empire comes from white, Christians, Western Europeans, and those removed from the actual empire's existence. As such, we cannot qualify the accuracy of these accounts, being that they are told through the lens of people who did not experience the empire themselves and have many cultural biases in their reporting. The few accounts from within the empire give us some rare insights into how slavery was viewed through the lens of the Ottomans themselves.
And also notice it's always Christianity. They always started enslaving because remember the king, he said the king always go around forcing Christianity on other cultures, and then when they don't accept it, they say they are pagans, and the Muslims do the same thing.
First, it's important to know that Muslims held a very different view on slavery to other nations and
They
religions
still enslave
involved in
people,
slave
whether they're
trade.
enslaved or not.
The Quran suggests that slaves should be treated with kindness and encourages manumission, freedom of slaves who have proved their loyalty. The Quran also teaches that slaves are of equal moral standing to their masters, but lower
See,
legal
people always
status,
use the Bible
and
as
not
an
legally
excuse to do things.
differentiated by
They
their
use in the
skin color.
Quran. Same
Despite
thing
this,
as a
though,
Christian.
those with disabilities and darker skin tones, coming from the sub-Saharan regions of Africa,
Which is mostly like
often
Africa.
sold for a much smaller price than their fit, healthy, and white counterparts. All Ottoman slaves were
Stick up in. So even in slavery, whites were still put above black. You see, the white slave fetch a better price than the black slaves. So even during slavery, black people was always behind white people, as I see in the Ottoman Empire. Let's continue. Oh, and don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. As long as a like is free, so click the like button. It helps with the algorithm. Also, click the notification bell so you get notified when I drop a new video. You don't know? Let's go.
expensive, usually owned by high-ranking officials who paid the most for virginal European girls aged between 13 and 25 and healthy teenage boys. But despite their expense, court records have shown that it wasn't just high-ranking officials who owned slaves. They were widespread in Ottoman society and worked domestically.
So domestically, that's mean it's not only high-ranking officials own slave in the Ottoman Empire, which is the white slave they own. They also have the same issue with regular, everyday people, but they have to have some form of status. That's what they're basically saying.
Culturally, in trade and in the military, or forced into sexual slavery. White women held positions in the household, usually seeing to higher profile tasks around the home and caring for the ladies of the house,
Really?
in contrast to their African counterparts, who usually received the more menial of tasks. Meanwhile, the men often worked as labourers or farmhands.
Yeah.
Domestic and labour slaves rarely remained slaves their whole lives, and could use their years in slavery to socially mobilise themselves. Further court records show that citizens of the Ottoman Empire lived by certain Islamic ideals with regards.
So stick up in. So even though, so again, in slavery, they still give white people preference over the black slaves, even though they are both slaves. Because you see, only white slaves was give certain positions in the home. They give the black slaves menial, like the lesser stuff to do, but they only give important things to the white slaves. So they still held the white people above white black people, even if they are both slaves and they are both slaves in that household. It's like a child and a stepchild. You give a stepchild most of the work to do, the sweeping the yard and the cleaning the dishes and keeping the house, while your child would be like taking care of the house, like handling the finance or helping with the baby or something. So still, it was a level below the white slaves, even though they're both slaves.
To slavery, and that they often freed their slaves upon the master's, deaths, or, in many cases, before. Many experienced slavery for around 7 years if they were black, and 9 years if they were white, to prove their loyalty before they were freed and usually moved up the ladder
So
in
that's
their
the
field of
only
work, to become formed
good thing about being a slave
overseas,
then is you get
where they would become
you serve 7
slaves
years
with
while the white
contracts,
serves 9. So
clients
that's the
of
only
their former
advantage
masters,
black people had
and
then.
receive wages. Evidence from Sharia court records showed these newly freed slaves were usually readily and willingly accepted into Ottoman society, particularly in smaller towns,
So again,
and
white
enjoyed a
people
large degree of economic and social independence.
blended
Let's
into
talk about the
society.
darker part of slavery in the Ottoman Empire, because slavery in general isn't dark enough. The sexual slave trade.
Pause. So that's mean you become a slave for 9 years as a white slave or white slave person, but you get the chance to get embedded and mix into the citizenship. But they didn't say anything about the white. I don't know if the black slaves had that same advantage of blending into the society when they are free as a slave. Let's continue.
The sexual slave trade in the Ottoman Empire can be divided into two categories. Young girls taken during war raids or sold to slavery by their impoverished families, and those who resided in the imperial harem. The lesser fortunate female sex slaves were expected to be freely sexually available to their male master, although not the husband of a female master, and often lived in
that's
part of a
smart.
harem. But they did have certain rights not afforded to other women in slavery. Lucky them. If a harem slave were to find herself pregnant, she could not be sold into further slavery and would be freed upon her master's death. And any child was born free and could not be sold or given away. Young boys were also victims of sex.
Stick up in. So you see, again, even though a white slave get pregnant during the Ottoman Empire slave times, if a white slave get pregnant, when that child is born a free person, and also the mother cannot be sold into slavery, and the master, they get freed if the master died. So that's three provisions there was in the law for white slaves. Compared to black slaves in general, worldwide, ever since slavery started, if you're black, you're enslaved. If you can make a child during enslavement, that child is still a slave. That child have no rights as well. And if that child come and grow up and make a child and make a child and make a child. So throughout history, black people, kids raise up, make kids, raise up, and they're all slaves. They have no right. But you see, a white slave have a child is free, and the mother cannot be put into enslavement after that. So you see, again, in every way, white slaves had the upper hand on the black slaves. Even though and this is a sex worker. So even a sex worker have more rights than a normal slave person, black or white.
Sexual slavery, although they usually worked in bathhouses.
And boys, now they're saying boys, so this means...
What may seem strange to modern day sensibilities is that being sold into sexual slavery wasn't necessarily considered a bad thing. In fact, although many were tragically sold out of desperation and poverty, even more were sold with the intention of utilizing the upward social mobility that came with a position as a sex slave, especially if you managed to secure a position in the imperial harem. Most sources regarding the imperial harem are sensationalist, written with a high degree of exaggeration and not much proof of the truths behind the tales, particularly in the case of Western writers. This is because many Ottoman citizens themselves did not know of the goings-on in the imperial harem, with all those contained within kept separate from society and sworn to silence of its secrets. Slaves within the imperial harem, known as concubines, used their position for social mobility and often had greater freedom and luxuries than many free people. They were guarded 24/7 by black eunuch slaves and enjoyed...
Stick up in. So you see, the white sex slave workers, which sometimes they was used as concubines, so they have to be available to everyone in the household except if the master is married. That's what they're saying, but we know how that works already. But the sex worker slave have rights that the other normal white slave doesn't have. So it's like it's a leg up. If you're sleeping with a general or a high-ranking person, then that gives you a certain level of respect among your peers, the other slave owners. And don't forget, you see, again, they use... So black people have been enslaved, but this one, in this sense, they turned all the men into eunuchs, which means cutting their dicks off. So they're to guard the sex workers for during the Ottoman Empire. So that's a double-edged sword they get there. They cut your dicks off for one, and then put you to guard the white slaves. So it's like a double whammy, basically.
Positions of power, the ability to become wed to a high-ranking official, or even one of the Sultan's wives, whereby, particularly in the period 1533 to 1636, they wielded great political power, having the ears of many influential men.
White sex slaves wield great power during that time, even though they're slaves, in the 15th century,
to submit to the men around them whenever they desired, and without choice of their suitor. Limited sources suggest very few harem slaves were ever freed from their concubine positions. Let's go back to the 14th century and the young boys who served in the Ottoman military branch, the Janissaries. The Janissaries were young boys taken as blood tax, or devshirme, at the end of battles and assimilated into the elite Ottoman army. Their taking was justified by the Sultan as part of the Islamic law that said the Sultan was entitled to 1/5 of booty collected in battle, beginning...
So the Sultan, which is the king, whatever in every war, they get 1/5 of everything seized, basically, that's what he's saying. Include young boys to join in the army, in the Sultan army as well. So I don't know if that's if it's only for the slave, if it's only for joining the army, or they had other, are they put them in bathhouses and tea houses where they serve men, young boys serve men. I know how that works out when that happens.
The third Sultan Murad I, who believed humans were a valid part of this booty. After their capture, the boys were forcibly circumcised, converted to Islam, and became part of an intense slave soldier regiment where they were subjected to extreme discipline, becoming highly focused elite soldiers.
Yeah, I can see
The Janissaries were forbidden to grow
that.
beards or marry before aged 40, and expected to show complete and utter loyalty to the emperor.
Stick up in. So even though, you see, these white slaves again, they took them from young, ingrained them into the army, train them, they have to get married by age 40. That means they pick a wife, they choose a wife for you, or you choose your own wife. Most likely, they're going to choose a wife for you. You have to, and you have to grow your beard out. So again, you see all these amenities the white slaves got, and you're not hearing nothing about the black slaves got. Again, they give them, the black slaves was treated as lesser than the white slaves. They pay less for them, they give them less task, important task to do. And even in this sex work, they don't have that much. They don't talk about the black slaves in the sex work either, because they use the black men, the eunuchs, to watch the white slave girls, because they was important because of who they were sleeping with, basically.
They received wages, were supported in battle, and became one of the first regiments to train in the use of firearms in the later centuries of the empire. In some cases, officials were even bribed by parents to take their children in the hopes of improving their socio-economic status.
Yeah, I would do the same
By
thing.
the 1600s,
living
the
then,
need
yeah,
for
the child can
Janissary
get to
troops
grow up in the
outweighed the
army,
number of boys drafted,
raise and become
Made
influential
conscription to the
in
Janissaries was
society.
abolished, allowing freeborn Muslims to join their ranks and capitalize on the potential to improve their socio-economic status. White slavery in the Ottoman Empire is not as black and white, pun not intended,
Obviously.
as it seems in other areas
They're
and
better
periods
off.
of time. Our lack of sources paints an incomplete picture of slavery and how slaves were treated in the empire, but what we do know creates a multifaceted and not wholly negative picture, as it does.
Okay, let me stop it there. So, oh, I tell this video came from the YouTuber A Day in History. I'll put a link in the description below, so you can go and check out the video in its entirety and subscribe to that channel as well. So, final thoughts. Yes, there was slavery, white slaves in the Ottoman Empire, which was started in the 1300 century to the 1700th century. I think they like 600 years there they had that grip on Europe, part of Europe, part of Asia, and part of Africa. But again, they treat white slaves better. They pay more money for white slaves. They use the black slaves to watch the white slaves, and they don't enslave blacks as long as white slaves. And that's the only advantage was you have to have been a black slave. Then is you get to be only enslaved for 7 years. But I don't know if they ingrained them into the society, because I'd have to look to that, because it wasn't specified. But they do say white slaves are ingrained into the society to become a citizen after 9 years of service, and they prove their loyalty. And if they get pregnant, they get released early, and the child is born a free Muslim, a free citizen. Compared to the black slave, when you see if a black can make a child, that child is a slave, and that goes on for generation on top of generation. But obviously too, the Muslim world, which is that's in Turkey, they treat slaves different from the white people. So you see, even during slavery, they didn't treat them like how the whites treated the blacks. In the 16th century, 15th, 14th century, when they started the slave trade from Africa, when they started, as again, the Arabs treated the black slaves worse, because they were the first to get enslaved Africans from Africa, because they had the means, the finance and the ships to do that, until it becomes worldwide. So even then, still America take the slave trade and multiply it by a couple times over, to get that influence in wealth and land, and get a leg up through history. So even when they were slaves, they still have a leg up. So anyway, as I don't know, it is a nice look at the Ottoman Empire. Next, I'm gonna do a video on the Chinese and the Japanese as well. So anyway, you don't know what it is. It's the boy, it's the Washington XXN podcast again. Don't forget to subscribe. Peace, one love, boom.